After 40 days, the pillar of fire will rise from earth to heaven, and all the world can see it. Then the Mashiach will be revealed, and from the east a star will rise in all colors. 7 other stars will turn to that star and make war with it on all sides 3 times a day until 70 days, and all the world will see. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and in this video I'm going to look at an interesting intersection that exists between UAP and religion, something I've been talking a lot about on this channel in the last few months. And specifically, I want to look at the way that the appearance of UAP or UFOs in modern times has often been taken as a sign of a great transition that the human race is on the precipice of, whether you describe that as the dawn of a new age, perhaps the age of Aquarius, or you think of it in terms of the end times, such as the Bible describes. There is a linkage that people have made between the appearance of these orbs of light, of these lights in the sky, and the arrival of those critical times. I wanted to open this video with that verse from the Zohar, the seminal Kabbalistic text that we have, because it describes a scenario which sounds very much like UAP experiences. Weird stars dancing around in the sky of many colors, pillars of fire. This is all consistent with what would in modern times be described as a UFO encounter, and yet this particular passage from the Zohar is describing events that happen at the same time as, or around the same time as, the appearance of the Mashiach, or the Messiah. So we're going to delve into that more deeply tonight. But before we do, I've got a couple of announcements to make. So I've been quoted in another issue of New Dawn magazine recently, in an article by Andrew K. Arnott, the same person who wrote about me previously in New Dawn this year. And so that article has been released now in the latest special issue of New Dawn. The Etheric Invasion is the article that features excerpts of an interview with me talking about what we're talking about tonight, the more spiritual side of the UFO phenomenon, and in fact how it goes all the way back to ancient times, and descriptions of angels or paranormal events surrounding critical points in religious history. So I highly recommend that you get that article if you're interested in reading more. Buy that copy of New Dawn magazine. And then I also want to flag an interview that I did on a podcast, Philosophical Minds. Go to Philosophical Minds and keep a lookout for that interview on there. Sightings of UFOs, or UAP as they are known today, have exploded since 1947. And even more so in the last years or decades. But why now? Why are the lights in the sky appearing now of all times? It's a fair question to ask. And it's a difficult question to ask because we cannot truly know the motives of whatever kind of beings are behind the UAP. And indeed, there may be more than one type of being behind different types of UAP. Like, for example, the light orbs might have very different intelligence behind it to something else. And different orbs might have different kinds of intelligence behind them even. And these different intelligences may have very different motives. But we may well surmise or deduce that these beings have started to hang around at this time to participate in a critical moment in human history, a shift so dramatic that it might even be described as the end of an age, perhaps even the end of the world as we know it. Of course, when such a radical change happens in a society, it can herald a cataclysm, the collapse of everything. But it can also signal the breakdown of old, calcified social structures that are no longer serving us and in fact are keeping us stuck where we are instead of allowing us to evolve. And so when those structures start to collapse, it presents an opportunity to start to rebuild and build from scratch and build a new type of society that is more based on principles of justice and righteousness. And the idea that this more optimistic scenario will come about, that the world will be regenerated in a vision of a just, godly order, is the perspective that we find in some of the world's great religions, describing the coming of a new age, the coming of a new golden age perhaps, or the arrival of the kingdom of God on earth, or the arrival of the Messianic Era. And civilization has experienced societal breakdowns before. This would not be the first time, but something feels different this time, which seems to indicate a more poignant change that is much more in line with what the ancient scriptures predicted for the end of the age or the end of the world. The fact that we are in a globalized society, in a globalized world now where everyone is affected by everybody else, the stakes are so much higher when things like war break out with nuclear weapons available. The ecological changes that our world is going through will completely shift life as we know it. Technology promises to completely revolutionize our understanding of life so that future generations will live a life that we couldn't have even imagined. And then there's the prophecies. So, for one thing, there are people, particularly in the New Age movement and Theosophy, who expect the arrival of a new age based on the precession of the equinoxes, and that we are roughly in the cusp now between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, in the great sidereal year of the ancient astrologers. Still, in other traditions, such as the Jewish tradition, we have the year 6000 in the Jewish calendar as the latest possible date that the kingdom of the Messiah can arrive. But realistically, it must arrive much sooner than that in order for all of the events leading up to that to take place. And so we are now less than 200 years away from that point, perhaps considerably less than 200 years away. And so things like this create a expectation among religious people or spiritual people that we are on the cusp of a new age. And perhaps the beings behind the UAPs are here to help usher in, or at the very least, bear witness to our entry into this new age. A new age which also promises to see our spiritual development as human beings greatly accelerated. We've already considered the Zohar as a text which has some tantalizing interpretations to it in this regard. Are there any other religious texts, though, that seem to draw a link between this coming new age, this coming Messianic era, and what might be considered UFO phenomena, and specifically looking towards the future? And I submit to you that there are. Before I explain why I think that, I want to first draw your attention to a particular concept in the Bible, or a particular symbol that occurs throughout the Bible, which is the symbol of the cloud, sometimes called Av in Hebrew, sometimes called Anan. But this symbol of the cloud appears quite frequently as a vehicle of God's presence. When God comes to be present among the Israelites, for example, or before a prophet, God's glory will appear within a cloud. And so it's quite an enigmatic symbol. And so the cloud has come to symbolize a sudden manifestation of the divine presence in the physical world, in order to give a sign to people, in order to guide people back towards God. But the behavior of these clouds in the Bible is often quite peculiar. And this has led Diana Pasulka and Chris Bledsoe, for example, to speculate that perhaps there might be some link between these clouds in the Bible and the phenomenon of light orbs, seeing as the light orbs, for those who have experienced them, exhibit very similar characteristics to these clouds that appear. And that's something that is discussed in UFO of God, for example. And we see these kinds of strange appearances of clouds which sound very similar to UAP experiences in the Bible, such as in Exodus 13:21, which reads, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night." In other places within the Pentateuch, within the Torah, we see God descending down in a cloud on Mount Sinai to give the revelation at Sinai. And we see God appearing over the tabernacle, God's presence appearing within a cloud. And then in Ezekiel 1, chapter 4, we have this verse describing the appearance of God and God's angels and the revealing of God's presence to the prophet Ezekiel. "And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the colour of amber, out of the midst of the fire." And I was discussing in a previous video about how the symbol of a cloud in the Bible is a symbol of theophany, of the sudden revealing or manifestation of God's presence to the people in quite a dramatic way, often inviting us to be called back to God in some way or to follow God in some way. And so now we have a link between that phenomenon, potentially, and the UFO phenomenon. And how does this all link back to the end times? Well, because we see this symbol of the cloud used in respect of end times prophecy in the New Testament, when Jesus is standing on the Mount of Olives and he's describing the final inauguration of the Messianic age, of the kingdom of God on earth. The thing he says will inaugurate it is that you will see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. So whatever these clouds are, their coming signifies the coming of the Son of Man. To be more exact, the Messianic age, the Messianic era, rather than any particular person. The Son of Man is really, rather than representing an individual, can be seen as representing the elect of humanity who have spiritually perfected themselves. And that is the thing that comes into the world with the clouds of heaven. So what if the uptick in UFO sightings that we have seen recently, and perhaps even this big push towards disclosure, because the reality of these lights in the sky has been so difficult to avoid addressing anymore. What if this is the sign that the coming of the Son of Man is very close at hand? It certainly is an intriguing possibility. Now, that's not to say that the entities behind the UAP should be treated like God or gods. Having said that, they do appear, in some instances at least, to be one and the same with the angels of antiquity, even the angels that previous generations of magicians and mystics have made contact with. And of course, in those earlier ancient or classical or medieval encounters with these purportedly the same beings, those beings directed us towards knowing God and following God. So perhaps that's what they're here to do again today. Perhaps the big takeaway of the appearance of these light beings at this time is as a big cosmic encouragement to us to reconnect with God, because we've lost that connection in our modern society, and it's a connection we sorely need to rekindle if we are to survive the coming challenges. Yet in this atheistic age, where because of the scientific revolution we have demystified so much of creation, and we value evidence over superstition, and we need a lot of evidence that's quite compelling to prove to us that a particular proposition is true. Perhaps these UAP now are being acknowledged as a reality and are increasingly being acknowledged as linked to the ancient phenomenon of contact with angels. Perhaps this is the thing, this is the evidence that we need to show us as a modern society, to help us to reawaken to the fact that there is a force greater than ourselves which can bring order and purpose to our lives, and allow ourselves to again contemplate that great mystery and not think that we already know everything that there is to know, and that what we know is a universe that is completely cold and meaningless. Again, it's an invitation to reconnect with God and living a purposeful spiritual life. Yet from my own reconnection with the divine, my own communications with angels through the Western ceremonial magic that I've done, I know a little bit about this coming age, and I know that it's not about being shown some truth by a God or asking to be told what to do by some God. Perhaps that is what the revelations of the past have done for us. But at this point in history, what I believe the beings really want for us is not to follow them at all, but to grow up. This is our spiritual coming of age. We have needed a divine authority figure to hold our hand through our spiritual development up until this point, but now it's time for us to stand on our own 2 feet and do the work ourselves and reach new heights of divine consciousness ourselves as independent actors with our own agency. That's not to say we won't have any help. And the more that I've come to research the history of contact with these light beings over the past year, the more I've started to think that they have been intervening in human development through history, rather than just being passive observers of our spiritual development and our civilizational development. But I think the greatest thing that they have given us is not a new source of energy, not weapons, not modes of space travel, but instead a spiritual technology. Certain of these beings, the ones that manifest commonly these days as orbs of light, have collaborated with us to inspire magical and mystical systems that allow us to ascend in consciousness. From the tour that the angels gave to Enoch, through the mansions of heaven, through to the Hecalot tradition, through to Merkaba mysticism, through to Kabbalah, through to Enochian magic and remote viewing techniques, which would eventually be used to communicate with the entities behind UAP. This is just the trajectory of the development of the Western attempts to communicate with these beings. And in each instance, they have given us spiritual technologies to deepen our contact with them and ultimately raise ourselves in consciousness, and to push the limits of our own human potential, and to realize that that potential is more than just a physical body or a mind, but that we can influence the universe non-locally as spiritual beings, and break free of our physical limitations in ways that we never even dreamt were possible. And as we enter the era of citizen-led disclosure, this spiritual technology and its effects, the byproducts of using this technology, are things that I would like to bring more into public awareness as a UAP experiencer, as well as someone who has studied the esoteric mysteries for almost 20 years and is increasingly understanding how those 2 worlds overlap. But when we can awaken our consciousness, we can return to God, and we can acquire new knowledge into the mysteries of the universe. We can open the mysteries of creation, and the kingdom of God will soon dwell among us as a result of the transformations that all of that can bring. Carl Jung saw the UFO as a psychological projection, which is perhaps a bit reductive, now that we've had it acknowledged that they are real, tangible things. But he saw them as symbols of divine beings coming to our aid in a time of need, a time of transition, which I think is a fair assessment, specifically during the transition from the old age to the new. He pointed out that their circular shape resembled the mandala, a divine symbol of wholeness. And he saw the often technological appearance of these objects as hearkening to the future of humanity and inviting us to evolve as a species, to become more advanced, to become more like the UAP and the beings behind that. And so I think that this moment that we are poised on the edge of right now, this moment of disclosure, whatever form that eventually takes, is a huge opportunity for us to once again launch into a spiritual revival, a rekindling of our relationship with God and our understanding of the spiritual side of life. And I think that that's a very exciting thing. And as citizen-led disclosure continues, I hope that 2026 proves to be a year of new knowledge, of revelation, and that rekindling of our connection with God, so that by forging that connection anew, we can do our part to usher in the age to come. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit the notification bell so YouTube actually notifies you of my future videos. And if you want to support me further, you can hit join all thanks down below, and I'll also leave a link to my merch store in the description below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.